Hey, this is OTP Fishing and welcome back to another video. Listen, I know it's been a while. I've been getting out on the water as much as possible, but my free time has been squeezed lately. So getting around to editing and then uploading has been pretty strenuous. Life comes at you fast, I guess. Anyway, I had some footage that I was holding on to and that I had been meaning to upload. This footage is from a couple of my recent outings. Now, I had meant to upload this footage separately as a standalone video, but I actually wanted to touch upon a topic that I've been thinking about for a number of months now. So I thought I would use this footage as a B-roll as I discuss that topic with you. My interest in fishing started about 13 or 14 years ago, and it started with my father, but not in a way you would think. Like a lot of lads in England around my age, growing up, I had a difficult relationship with my dad. It was often pretty strenuous, typically full of conflict. We used to row quite often and fight fairly frequently. After one particularly bitter fight, both left emotionally bruised by our exchange of verbal broadsides, we both came to the decision that we really needed something to glue our relationship back together. A mutual hobby, a mutual interest, something we could both share in. Fishing seemed like a natural choice. It is, after all, the archetypical father-son activity. So, during a family vacation on the south coast of England in early mid-2000s, me and my dad decided to stop by a local tackle store. We ended up purchasing some rods, reels, some basic tackle, and away we went. Some months later, after a handful of unsuccessful trips to a local private lake, I decided that I really needed to venture out on my own and visit a local tackle store closer to home to tap into some local insider knowledge. Now bear in mind this was in the early to mid-2000s in England, which frankly is a country that's usually a few years behind technological trends. So whilst my family did have a computer, we weren't really tech savvy. And we certainly didn't understand the encyclopedic nature of the internet. You also have to consider that back then we didn't have YouTube and other resources to tap into. So going to your local tackle store was really your best option with regards to tapping into local knowledge. So I made my way down to the local tackle store in my local town to tap into this local resource so that I could get a better understanding of my local fishing spots. Now, to set the scene, this was a pretty big deal for me. Back in my teenage years, when I was about 13 or 14 years old, it would be fair to say that I was pretty shy. So me going into the store on my own was for me at that age a pretty big deal. Now, if memory serves, I did go into the store with a specific purpose. I think at the time I was trying to buy some new hooks and I wasn't sure about the size of hook that I should purchase. So that was the excuse to go into the store in the first place. Now, of course, once that question had been answered and I'd built up a little bit of confidence during the initial conversation, I was hoping to maybe bombard them with further questions. Questions that would have related to me being a complete beginner. At this point, I'm inside the shop, which is a typical English tackle shop. Small, dark, and with a fairly limited inventory of tackle supplies. There were two guys inside the store also, both of whom were employees, and they were having a conversation over by the register. Bracing for the worst, I approached the nearest guy who was on my side of the counter. As is typical in England, he didn't provide me with a welcome, nor did he ask if I needed help. He simply waited for the question that he knew was coming. So I asked him, "Hi, do you have this particular brand / size of hooks?" The guy on my side of the counter looked at the guy who was behind the register. They both paused for a second, and then they laughed. It wasn't really a sustained laugh, and frankly it was more of an involuntary chuckle. But it had that note, that brutal note of, wow, what did that dumbass just say to it? He then proceeded to answer my question rather brusquely with, We don't sell them. I responded, oh, okay. I was young with no knowledge or experience, and my confidence was completely shot. I had wanted to ask them so many questions: what the local fishing scene was like, where the local spots were, if there was any recommendations they could give me for locations of where to fish, about line, hooks, live baits, how to tie knots, etc., etc. But I felt like a complete fool, and my mind went completely blank. So we sort of stared at each other for about 3 seconds before I frankly couldn't take it anymore, and with a rather awkward thanks, I turned around and left the store. I never found out what was so funny about my question. Likely answer is that I got the name of the brand or the size of the hook completely wrong, although I can't be too certain. Now I bet some of you are thinking, God, OTP, you were just way too awkward, and you weren't demanding enough, and you weren't forceful enough. And I get it. When I look back at my 13-year-old self, I don't look back with envy. I was a shy, skinny kid, and I was trying to branch out and discover new things, and I was making those cautious first steps that teenagers usually make when they're trying to head in that direction. If I could go back in time and put myself in that situation again, I would have told that guy exactly what I thought of him in that moment. How ashamed he should feel to make a teenager or a young person feel inadequate for asking very basic questions in an industry where he really required my money to be spent. But I didn't. I walked out. A couple of months later, fishing sort of fell away, and I never picked up a fishing rod again until 2 years ago when I was 25 years old. Now, did that experience in the fishing store shape my attitudes towards fishing? Yes, it most certainly did. When I left that store, I felt that that experience was a representation of the local fishing community. I thought that would be the kind of attitude I would have to deal with. And when I was 13 years old, that just really wasn't in my wheelhouse. So I moved on to other things. Now, if I had been more passionate about fishing, I'm sure I would have found another avenue. But think back to when you first began fishing with your parents or your grandparents or by yourself. There was that grey area as you were stumbling around in the dark trying to figure things out. The direction of your life could have gone a different way, and fishing could have fallen by the wayside. It's usually the small interactions that push you in one direction or another, as was the case for me. So the lesson that I'm trying to give, and that I want people to understand, is that we should treat kids and teenagers and beginners at large who are just entering the sport. We should treat them with respect and understand that they're going to ask stupid questions, and that they're going to ask questions that have easily, readily available answers, but they're going to ask them anyway. If we respond to what we consider to be silly questions in the same kind of manner as I was treated to in that tackle shop in England, then the only thing we're doing is harming this hobby and harming the sport of fishing at large, because we will turn people away. So you have to understand, when you're out there on the water and a kid approaches you, or a young adult, or a guy, or a woman, and they ask you a very simple question, something like, hey, what kind of bait do you use? If you roll your eyes and dismiss them, that is the impression they're going to take away. That is how they're going to view the fishing community. They will not try again, for the most part. So that will be one less person who takes up this wonderful hobby of ours. That will be one less person propping up the industry that supports that hobby. That'll be one less person to fish with. Whenever we have someone entering the sport and they're making those first cautious, tiny steps, grab them by the shoulder and give them a helping hand. Because no matter how much knowledge we gain and no matter how much experience we accrue, we all began that same journey with the same small cautionary steps. So as an angling community, Let's try and foster a really healthy relationship between ourselves and with those who are just beginning to enter the sport. This has been a video essay by OTP Fishing. I hope you enjoyed, and tight lines, guys.